Hi guys, this is Nadia from Imbali Crafts, and today I'd like to show you how to create these hammered wire earrings. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button because I upload new stuff on a regular basis. I quite often make PDF tutorials for the videos I put up on here. They also come with kits. I have all sorts of gemstones, square half round wire and beads, and all sorts of nice goodies on my website, so I will pop a link below and you can take a gander over and see if there's anything you fancy. Last but not least, we have an awesome wire wrap group, which I will also pop a link below, so take a look and come and join us. Right, let's get started. All right, so I'm getting started by drawing a shape on a piece of paper. This is especially important if you are creating earrings, I find personally anyway. I like to have something like that as a reference so that I can make sure that they are both symmetrical. I've got this PDF for purchase in my website for a small fee, so you can check out the link and see if you want to use that or just draw your own. That's up to you, obviously. All right, so I'm creating a loop at the top, leaving about 4 or 5 centimeters on the left. I'm not sure what that is in inches, probably about 2 inches maybe. And then I'm using my round nose pliers to create the first swirl. So as I always do when I create swirls, I use my round nose pliers to gently squeeze the end as I rotate the pliers. That allows me to taper the wire end into a point. You can achieve that by filing the wire as well. I just find it quicker and less work if I do it this way, but obviously everybody has got, you know, their own sort of ways to do things. This is how I like to do it. And you then just kind of roll it in and reference back to the drawing. And then we're going to go to the other side and shape it. Obviously, when you're at home, take more time to do it carefully and slowly so that everything, you know, turns out symmetrical. I'm trying to do this as quick as possible for the video so you don't get too bored watching me do it. So I'm kind of rolling this in, and I am then going to do the same with the tip. So the other side needs to be obviously a little bit longer because we're going the circumference of the circle. And then we're rolling that in as well. And you can always adjust it at a later stage. You know, if it's a little bit too long, you can cut down the swirl and make it a bit shorter. Rather too long, obviously, than too short. You can tell here, this is very wonky. So when you're at home, take your time to do this nice and round. All right, so I fixed it. It looks much better. And I'm referencing it back to the drawing. So obviously the closer it is to the shape, the better, especially as I said, if you're making earrings, you want them to be symmetrical and the same size. So I'm very, very gently bending these swirls apart because we want to get a flat side on each. So now obviously you need to decide. You can hammer on the front and get a textured look, or you can hammer from the back so that the sort of hammer marks are hidden on the back, or else later at a later stage you can just use some sandpaper and get rid of the marks completely, so it doesn't really matter where you hammer. So what I'm doing here is I'm using the small ball of my domed chasing hammer, and it's important to have a domed chasing hammer for me anyway, because the sort of flat sided ones tend to put markings in your wire. So when there's a dome like this, it's much easier to hammer and without any marks in it. So you can see me here hammering quite hard, but not too hard. And I always hammer, direct the blow into the direction I want the wire to expand to. So I'm going to do the same with all of them until they are flattened out. All right, so that's what it looks like. And I've put these pieces back together and overlap them, and you can decide which swirl you want to be at the front. So next I'm going to bind the swirls together, and I'm using a piece of half round wire. So I've used some 0.8 20 gauge for that. You can use your 0.6, which is your 22 gauge as well. That works, whatever you have handy, as long as these are bound together. And I'm just going to wrap around until this section within the swirls is covered. All right, so I'm finishing off here and I'm pulling this through, and I'm wedging the half round wire in between the swirl and the frame of the earring. So that will kind of wedge it in place and stop it from getting stuck on your clothing or hair if you're going to wear these. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So just pull it through, and you can see me kind of pulling it in between this one broke. So okay, so anyway, this works. So you just make sure that you cut off all the free hanging edges and make sure it fits. So the next step is one of my favorite settings, a coil or lollipop setting, depending on what you do with it. And for this one, you need a fairly long length of your 0.8 20 gauge square wire. And I am rotating near the end of the one side, and I am rotating this in an anti-clockwise motion, and make sure that the wire sits flat. So this is square wire, so you want one of the flat surfaces to be as upright as possible. Sorry, not upright, but flat, so that the stone has got a nice flat surface to sit on. And I'm creating a loop that is just small enough so that it holds the bigger stone I'm going to use just now, without it falling through, but without covering too much of the bottom, so that the light comes through and it doesn't project too much, if that makes any sense. So you can see it sits quite nicely, it just balances under the rim. And then I'm putting my finger over it. I need to flatten it out some more. Be careful not to squeeze the wire too hard, otherwise you're going to mark it and also work hard on it, which will make it a lot harder to rotate like that. So you mustn't work the wire too much when you're doing this kind of setting, otherwise it becomes work hardened really quickly, and that makes it really difficult to shape it. I find that anyway. So I very gently curve the wire around the bottom of the stone yet, and this will create a setting that will slowly, the more you coil, will capture the stone. And I keep coiling until the wire coils over the stone on the side. So I'm just rotating this, and I press the stone in as I go along, and you can see now that the stone is starting to become wedged underneath the wire. Once I'm satisfied, this is what it looks like. So you want to make sure it doesn't fall out. Obviously it needs to be nice and tight. So next we need to bend the wire downwards a little bit. So we're going to begin by giving it a 90-degree bend to the right, and then I'm going to bend the wire downwards and then upward again. So this creates like a little ledge like that. So that just means that the coils are sitting at the same height. So the next step is to bend the wire towards me, and then I'm going to create the next loop, which obviously is just a tiny bit smaller than the first one, because I'm going to use a 6mm stone. The first one was an 8mm, and I'll try and go into the same direction every time. So I don't, like with the vine setting, I go in opposite directions when I coil the wire. With this setting, it's in the same direction each time. So I'm picking up the next stone, and I'll just make sure the rounder your setting is, the better it will look and it will work. If the setting is round enough to hold the stone, so that every successive coil you put on top will be round as well. So I'm just going to put the stone in. Sometimes they don't want to stay, so just pop it back in. And the setting gets much easier the more you try it. It's not the easiest setting in the world to do, but once you learn how to do it, it becomes second nature. And I like it because it adds a lot of detail to your work, and you can set gemstones that aren't drilled. Now, obviously, if you're not comfortable with that setting, you can just use some drilled beads instead. So it's not a deal breaker if you don't find it difficult, or you don't have any gemstones to set. So just use beads instead. So I'm doing exactly the same with the second stone as what I did with the first. So quite often I use my pliers to adjust because I want to make sure that the setting is as round as possible. So I'm going to repeat what I did. So bend it at a 90-degree angle, then downwards and then upwards again, just to make sure that everything sits on the same level. And that's what it looks like. So I'm going to repeat this procedure with the remaining 3 stones. So you're just going to do the same thing again until you have something that looks like that. So the next step is to attach the setting to the earring. So I'm going to feed the wire through, and I'm going to attach, I'm going to pull this out again and put both ends through the earring, or I could have just placed it from the bottom. And I'm going to just wrap the wire endings through and around the frame. And you need about 2, 3 or 4 wraps depending how thick your wire is. So the 0.8 is just about thick enough for the 0.8. 1 mil would have been better, but then it would have been too thick for the smaller sizes, which is 18. The 1 mil is an 18 gauge, by the way. So I'm just wrapping it around and try and make sure that the square wire sits with the flat side against the frame as well, so that you don't have one of those edges sticking up rather than a nice flat size, which will make everything a bit more bulky. Do the same on the top obviously as well. So I've attached them both and I'm trimming off the wires, and just make sure you trim them off on the inside because there's less likelihood of the wire snagging on your hair or clothing. So I'm just rolling that in, and that is the initial stage created. You can keep it like that, but I quite like to create a little accent at the top. So for that you need your 1.3 millimeter 16 gauge wire, and I'm going to create a bend towards the right end of the right hand side, like so. Create a V shape, quite a sharp sort of bend, and I achieve a sharp bend by squeezing near the tip of the bend, and then I'm gently rotating the wire into a pear shape. And this initial pear shape needs to be just big enough so that the back side of your flat back cabochon fits on that. So this is what the shape looks like, and I'm going to create a little loop using my round nose pliers, so with a short end. So I'm just putting my round nose pliers on the wire and I'm rotating it around, and you can adjust this later. Even if it's a bit wonky, it doesn't matter. You can adjust it at a later stage. So that's what it looks like so far. So next we're going to create the initial shape. It's a tiny bit fiddly at this stage obviously because there's nothing holding the stone in place. So I'm just placing the cabochon on top of the backing that we've just created, and I'm going to establish the shape. So press as hard as you can and kind of shape the wire around the cab. And if it doesn't want to do that, it doesn't matter. Put the stone aside and shape it without the stone to begin with. The wire that's put in place now will give you a little bit of stability when you place it on, so that'll help you keep it in place, and you can judge where you're going to put the bend for the tip of the pear. So I'm shaping it around, and you just need to kind of gauge where the bend needs to be. So putting it on top. You can use a marker pen if you want to, or you can just kind of guesstimate it and eyeball it, as they say. So that's what it looks like. So I know where the bend needs to go approximately. And just bear in mind that when you put a bend in wire, this will add a couple of millimeters, so you need to make it a bit longer than you think it will be so that it fits around the stone. So you place your pear again, and that seems to be a good fit, and I'm sharpening the bend by pressing with my thumb against the wire and the plier, and that will give you a nice sharp tip to fit around the stone. and I'm squeezing at the same time as I'm pushing. That will make it a nice sharp tip. So now it'll be much more fun to do the setting because the stone is held in place by the wire on the one side. So I'm wrapping it around, and you can pull as tight as you can, obviously not too tight to distort the setting, but tight enough so that the wire fits around the gemstone snugly. So I'm going to repeat the same thing again. So here it's bugging me because it's not straight, so I'm adjusting it, but it doesn't really matter at this stage. You can do that later. So I'm going to create another bend, so near the tip of the wire, and you have to guesstimate or use your marker pen. Remember to leave an extra few millimeters to allow for the wire size. We're going to do the same thing again, and you need to do this until the wire just covers the curve of the cabochon, so that there's no way the stone can actually fall out. And this is why you need to use a fairly thick wire, so that the wire is strong enough to not get distorted or bent out of shape when you're wearing it. So you 1.3 16 gauge or 1.6 for bigger stones, which is your 14 gauge, will work well for that. So I'm creating a 90-degree bend downwards, just so that the loop, when you're holding things with it, is kind of central, and the setting doesn't look lopsided when you're hanging things from it. So the loop needs to be towards the back. So I'm putting a bend in it from the bottom, and this is kind of like a step downwards. So next I'm trimming off, judging how big the loop will be. So cutting that off, and then I'm going to use my round nose pliers to create a loop. Again, remember you need to be towards the back. So I'm shaping this over until the loop sits underneath the stone, and then I can finally adjust the loop that's been bugging me at the top. And then obviously you trim that off until you're satisfied, and you can always adjust it later if it's too big, make it smaller, and use my round nose pliers again to adjust it. And the setting is pretty secure actually because of the wire thickness. So so that's it. So beautiful little setting. You can use that just as is, or you can put dangles on it. It's up to you. And the last step, obviously, if you like to do that, is to oxidize your pendant. For that I use liver sulfur, which I buy off eBay or Amazon. You get it in all sorts of different places. It comes in liquid form, gel form, solid form. There's loads of tutorials online that shows you how to use it. And obviously polish up your pendant after that, and just make sure that everything is straight and that everything hangs straight. And that's the earrings done. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe. I would absolutely love it if you would pop into my Instagram, my Facebook, and my TikTok. Visit me on my wire wrappers and metalsmith group. We always have some fun challenges, and as I said before, visit my website for PDF tutorials, kits, gemstones, wire, and all sorts of goodies. And that's it for me. Thanks for watching.